Like a huge YouTube faux pas, I imagine, must be to have the hook or just like the cold open be a Jerome Powell news conference clip. It's like if you wanted to try to get people to click away as fast as possible, I imagine that would be like a good way to try to do it. But instead, I think I'm going to tell you everything that I learned over the past week plus in researching this stuff. And then we'll watch the clip at the end. And hopefully the audience and you will feel the way I felt when I saw that clip after researching all this stuff, when it was just like, oh, I know everything that he's talking about. I know what he's going to say before he says it. And that was like kind of a cool feeling. So what we try to do here is anytime there's sort of a big news headline, we try to get to the primary sources, read them ourselves, and kind of present what we find. And recently, last month, so this was on August 1st, I think you probably remember that Trump fired Dr. Erica McIntyre. So she was the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics after she revised down a couple of the previous month's labor numbers. And, Trump got on Truth or whatever and was kind of railing against her. This was a Biden appointee. It's a political, economic labor statistics data hit job. But then more recently, so just last week, so this was on September 9th, there was another economic news release. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics had revised down the annual numbers down like 911,000, which is the largest ever, the largest on record. And that's when I was just like, okay, what's going on here? Like, I don't really know where these numbers come from.
Right.
I had heard from other commentators. So I know the All In crowd covered this like this time last year. I remember vaguely a conversation. Sachs was kind of railing against it. How come it's
the
always
same headline, largest ever?
I think it was the largest since like 2009.
No, I'm fairly certain. Like last year was 800 and some thousand.
You want to bet? Let's put it down.
Okay, all right, let's do it.
Who's just researching this for a whole week?
But yeah, I think
maybe
this is.
We'll put the winner up right here.
Yeah,
because I'm not totally sure. I'm not willing to put any money on it. I think Sachs was like railing against this, saying they're always getting rounded down. What's up with that? And that was a downward revision. And that's a good question. And I think I have an answer. Not even like where they're coming from, but also why they're rounded down. Why have they been downward revisions?
Yeah, this has been something that's been going on for years. This yearly revision was the largest ever. The previous was quite large as well. Maybe the largest before that, maybe not, maybe since 09. But even the few years before that, there were people that were talking about they're getting revised down every month.
I'm gonna give you perhaps some theories. All right, let's get started. Let's set the scene. There are a little over 12 million establishments in the United States, and there's something like 155 million employees. Now, obviously, you can't feasibly go and ask all of them every month, so it has to, take a sample. And it's got to start surveying that sample. Well, how do you even figure out that sample? And what they really leverage off of is what's called the quarterly census of employment and wages. Now, that's sort of another census. The vast majority of that data comes from the unemployment insurance, like tax returns that employers need to file every quarter, right? And that covers like 97% or something of all the establishments. And then they sort of had a snapshot of the entire population. And they do that like every March, or they have that data as of March. Now, once you have the total population, you can start to sample it. Okay. So they grab a sample. And that sample, if you go on their website, they'll say something like 121,000 employers over like 631,000 work sites. Now it's like, okay, a couple words getting thrown around here. They'll sort of talk about work sites are referring to the establishments, just based on where I've seen that number elsewhere on their website. So that's kind of their coverage. It's like 631,000 over around 12 million. 631,000, that's a lot. But it's still just a kind of small percentage of the total number of establishments. And what they do, they have this sample, right? This is their base sample of, call it 630,000, and they give them a form to fill out, right? What else are you going to do? We can show you an example of that form. And this is what it looks like. Right? But the interesting thing is they're just grabbing a pay period. So this is like every month, and they're just asking you for what's your employee count. Right? That's like for the purposes of figuring out the month over month employment numbers. That's really the key one. Although the survey does ask for other things, which they also need to report on. They have women employee count, the payroll, the total dollars, commissions, the hours, including overtime, and then the overtime hours. So they're collecting a bunch of other data. The one we're interested in is in column one. They're just asking straight up for the employee count. And now from the sample, presumably you can see how this company, maybe the employees went up or down. You can extrapolate more broadly to the industry, and then even more broadly to the entire nation.
And what's the difference between all employees and production employees?
Yeah, so then all employees is everyone, production employees, I guess, is management. Good question, Joe. Damn. Yeah, so somewhere in like the bowels of BLS, they can see how like the ratio of middle management has grown over just the grunt workers.
Yeah, now that I think about it, actually, that is one of the metrics that people will talk about whenever these things are of extra importance. You can go all the way down. People will talk about managerial employment versus non-managerial. It's really good to find the source of all these things, the root of all these things.
No. We gotta keep doing that. We're building our brand here, Joe. So they send this thing out, right? But sort of the one problem one of the big problems that they get has to do with response rates. Now they're not, the employers are not legally required to respond to these surveys. But then on the other half, the BLS is expected to come out with, an estimate for the previous month's employment numbers just a couple days after the month end, right? It's like a week or something. Like it's very little time. So they just have to
quick
work.
Turnaround.
Yeah. So they just have to work with the data that they have. By the time that rolls around, only about 60-ish% has responded. And that's been kind of like trending downward. And then month over month, it can, vary a lot in terms of how many are responding. Sometimes as low as 50%. Sometimes it might be higher, like, 80%. So in the mid 2010s, it's been like, 80% ish by the first estimation for the total job numbers. And then it's kind of been ticking down. So then the first revision happens a little bit later after they get more data that comes in. And at that point, usually the response rate is closer to like 90%. And then they give another, then they have that revision. That's the first revision. And then, even after that, they'll have a third revision. And by that point, there's something like 93 or 95% of a response rate.
Yeah. And that was part of the problem we saw recently when Trump fired the head. It was the previous 2 months, like those rolling 2-month revisions that were revised. It was that might have been down by the largest 2-month increment as well on record. So it's really like a material change.
So yes, they look like really large numbers. You're adjusting things by hundreds of thousands, but as a proportion of the total population that you're trying to estimate, and we're talking about 0.5%, 0.3%, 0.2%. I mean, in one regard, it's not too bad, right? That they're able to estimate like this top number up here, right, of 159 million. And they're really off by this little sliver.
I don't think they're measuring the entire workforce every month. I think they're measuring the month over month change in what they're seeing. So, yeah, the entire workforce is hundreds of millions, but on a month to month basis, that change is, 3 orders of magnitude smaller or more even. Yeah. So it's,
I mean, yes and no. So I was sort of wondering about this too, because I know when they report, and a lot of the reports are literally just the change, like over the top line number. And then I kind of wondered, is it not the same thing? I mean, from like statistically speaking, what are you doing? I mean, instead of taking the total number that they're reporting on. So again, we saw the form. It shows they're asking for the total amount of employees. Now you could either take like what that delta is in employees from like 1 month over another month and have a tiny number and blow that up to 100,000, or you could take the total number and blow it up to 155 million. But that proportion of blowing it up is still, like, statistically speaking, I think a similar exercise. To put it another way, it's like, well, fine, they're doing the delta month over month, but if they're right or not, you can still figure out what the top line number is just by taking the delta. So that was month over month. So now we have this new source of truth, quote unquote, the quarterly census of employment and wages that we said that defined the sample. To take that point a step further, we're sitting now in September, and we just got a point of truth for last March. And then we just had a bunch of month over month estimates from March 2024. So we were kind of like floating along March 2024 all the way to 2025, doing these month over month estimates, doing our best to figure out what like the total employment number is. We keep floating on until September, and then bam, we get a new like real source of truth number for that previous March. And it's lower than what we thought March would be. And it's lower by 911,000. So what do? So you basically just go and you take that same line and you kind of just you just sort of rotate it down a little bit so that it just goes through that new source of truth. Right? And that's how you kind of revise
Pretty
things
much.
down. There's a sophisticated modeling technique you can do called peanut buttering, where you just sort of spread it out nice and even. I'm kidding. It's not that complicated.
10-year look ahead CBO estimates.
That's an industry term. Feel free to take it. It's a finance industry term, peanut buttering. Just not sure how quite they're going to spread. You're just going to spread them out nice and even. Now those are the annual benchmark revisions. Now that happen. Now you can also track how these have changed. So unfortunately, it's not the cleanest graph. Oh, geez. This is something. This is kind of what the benchmark revisions, what the changes look like.
The blue line is the actual corrected level, I assume.
Percent change in employment from previous March, I assume.
Yeah.
But really the orange one is what I'm interested in, which is just the size of the revision. So, there's a couple of them over in the plus side. About half, I don't know, maybe a little more than half on the negative side. I mean, it's not super obvious that it's on one side or the other.
Looks like you're right, by the way, though, Luke. Looks like you're right. I think before this year, 2009 was the biggest.
Joe.
How could I ever doubt you?
You question me? Let me look at so this is the magnitude of the monthly revisions. So you were saying recently they're kind of more on the negative side, and I would agree with that. There's a couple in the poke above, but mostly they're staying to the minus side. And
notice oh, sorry. You'd want this series to oscillate evenly around zero. And if you look back like 2000 to 2006, that's kind of what it looks like. 2008 is a blip, and 2010 to 18 or 19, pretty reasonable. But you can see like a trend downward from 21 onward. I think you have to squint a little bit, but but when you're watching the month after month like that, it becomes a lot more apparent. And I think this is a great demonstration of that.
So something's going on here. So we've covered two things so far. We've covered sort of the month over month process, and we covered the year over year benchmarking. But there's another thing. There's one other factor that they need to account for. And you sort of touched upon it with the modeling. And this has to do with the deterioration of the sample. So imagine if you are the head of the BLS and you're faced with this problem where like businesses, they don't have to respond. But you also know that, businesses, they're established all the time, but then they also go to business all the time. Now, if a business didn't respond month over month, does that mean that the business failed? Did they go to business? Did they die? Right? And then what about all the new businesses that were born? This is actually literally what's called. It's called the birth-death model. For some reason, they call I got to say, when I first read into that, I'm like, are they talking about people? Like, are they factoring in the demographics or something? It's like, no. They're talking about...
Luke, corporations are people too.
They're talking about businesses being born and businesses dying. But they also have no way, the sample is no way to know how many businesses were born. Because again, they just have that fixed sample. Now, over a year or even like 18 months, it's quite dynamic. And it's enough to start moving stuff at the very margins. Again, if we're off by just like 0.3, 0.4%, people are in a tizzy, right? So they have to have some way to account for this. And you can imagine how a sample might deteriorate. Imagine if you had like two big circles. You had the population on the outside, and on the inside you had the actual sample. That sample number doesn't move, right? But on the edges, there's going to be some oscillation. There are going to be companies dying, right? So they're kind of going in, and then there are going to be more births. So it's sort of moving around, and the sample doesn't change. So they have this net birth death model. So remember when I said that the source of truth, the numbers, they're actually pulled quarterly, the quarterly census of employment and wages. It's not annual, it's quarterly. So they have a view into this quarterly, but they are able to kind of get a view here as to actually how many, like what the actual number of net births and deaths were, presumably over the last quarter, maybe over like the last year. And then I think what they do, if it's like a positive number, so you can imagine an expansionary time frame where like after COVID, where like there were more births than there were deaths. So you have like a positive number. Now, as far as I can tell, they basically just draw a line like from where they're sitting, and they draw like a straight line. So if you're expanding, they just sort of keep expanding it up. And then when that growth does not materialize, you end up overshooting stuff. And that's what they think. It's not the only reason, but it is a pretty big reason. It accounts for almost maybe like half of the difference, a little less, I think, related to how come they're overshooting these numbers.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a structural reason. Like I was just pointing out how it looks like that line is structurally lower. That it does sound like a reasonable explanation. That or just eyeballing this chart, you see how crazy COVID was, relatively speaking. It's natural to see some after effects, but I guess for going on 5 years after, we're still seeing some sort of residual impacts here.
Right. And that's kind of what they're blaming is going on. So you can imagine, like, this is the actual numbers. So if you can imagine you're sitting at a point like here, and like they're looking at this, and previously they're having a lot more net births than deaths. And the estimate, you just draw a straight line from that, and it goes like up this way. But obviously we're in a cooling phase. So the rate at which this number is moving up, its slope is starting to decrease, and it's flattening out. So if you were to just extrapolate that straight line, you'd be overshooting it each time. So that's maybe one theory. And again, I think this is why they were, able to predict as much. All right. So how do you feel now? I think, let's go watch that Powell clip.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Edward Lawrence from Fox Business. So we saw the preliminary benchmark revisions down 911,000. The revisions for June were the first negative revisions we've seen since December of 2020. How can the Fed base important decisions on rate and what to do with the interest rates on data that seems to be, as you've called it in the past, noisy?
So on the QCEW, the revision that we saw was almost exactly what we expected. It was amazing how close the expectation was. So, and the reason for that is, for the last bunch of quarters, there's been almost a predictable overcount. And I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics really does understand this, and they're working hard to fix it. It's got to do, of course, it has something to do with low response rates, but it's also got to do with what's called the birth death model, because a good amount of job creation happens around new companies, and how many go out of business, how many are founded. And it's just really hard. You can't survey for that. You've got to have a model that predicts that. And it's quite difficult to do, especially when the economy is undergoing big changes. So, and they've been working on that and are making progress on it. But the data we get is still well good enough for us to do our work. To the extent we have issues around data right now, it's about low response rates. That's happened all over really. Response rates are just lower to surveys now, both in and out of the government. And it's no great secret. We want higher response rates, and we need those to have, less volatile data. And the way to get that is to make sure that the agencies that collect the data have sufficient resources to drive higher response rates. It's not a complicated problem, but that's what it takes. It's not a mystery. That's what it takes. The other thing I'll say, Edward, is in the case of the job creation, the response rate is quite low for the first month, or lower for the first month. By the time you get to the second or third month, you're still collecting responses for that last month, for that prior month. And you get to the place where the data are much more reliable by the second and certainly the third month. So it's not that we don't get the data, it's just that we get it a little later.
It's a really complicated process. I am sympathetic to how these errors can occur. There's been a structural shift in the data, and I don't know if you can attribute all of that to response rates. It's tough to say. But I guess, maybe we don't want to go here, but on the monetary policy point, it threw me off because he was very confident, and he said, we expected this amount of revision downward. And to me, that's like a crucial point with regards to thinking about what the path of policy should be.
Before you get into the monetary policy implications, can I just tie a bow on sort of
no, please,
the
please
thing he
go
was
ahead.
talking about, and then we'll jump into the monetary policy implication stuff. You touched upon one thing I thought was really interesting, was that they expected the revision downward. That was one thing, and it could be because of what we explained here with the birth-death model, which he also did talk about. It could also be that they must have some sort of insight. And one of the biggest criticisms that I have of that response was I just don't understand if they collect this population level data every quarter, how that feeds in and how it doesn't feed in. That's really what doesn't make a whole lot of, that's like the big, like, to put it another way, if they only get the source of truth or the published source of truth, the re-benchmarking only happens every March. But didn't they also do the survey in like December? So why don't they also have like the December source of truth numbers? And now all of a sudden you kind of can just like replot the line. You just draw a straight one and you can easily see like about 900,000 less. You know what I mean?
I think the yearly number, they use individuals' tax returns to count the numbers of jobs. Because I agree, if you're getting a aggregate unemployment benefits tax quarterly, you look at a company that has 100,000 employees, how are you supposed to tell how many jobs, some huge number comes from? But if you're counting every individual's tax return from the IRS, I think that's like the closest source of truth that they have, and that's where that yearly, best source of truth comes from.
I thought about that too, and like maybe that's why there's such a lag, and maybe because with taxes or whatever, there are so many extensions, so maybe they wanted to wait until they get more of them in or something. That wouldn't happen until September. Something else is going on also as to why there's a 6-month lag on these things.
I think it's those extensions, like you said.
Maybe it's the extensions. Still, though, the other thing, and this is kind of one thing that annoyed me, and it stood out, and it really doesn't have too much to do with what we just talked about, but when he said like, the whole problem here really is response rates for that month over month number, right? For the CES thing. And the reason why we're not getting the good response rate is because what, Joe? Do you remember what he said?
I don't. Shit.
we don't have enough resources.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We could do more. We could be doing a better job.
Said it's simple.
Give the agency more money. Yeah.
Shovel more money at it.
Just give us more money.
Wow.
The way to get that is to make sure that the agencies that collect the data have sufficient resources to drive higher response rates. It's not a complicated problem, but that's what it takes. It's not a mystery.
And like, I think we got to see good insight into why these agencies are constantly growing.
That exact mentality. That
exact mentality. I think we got an insight into it. That's what these conversations, everyone below him are all saying the same thing. It's like, hey, look, they're slipping.
That honestly makes me get behind Trump's decision even more. Instead of just shoveling more money, you got to shake it up. No, we need a new head. We got to redo this. It's in trouble.
It's like, no, you got plenty of resources. Okay. But that's the tone. That's like the message. We were talking about this before. Why these things keep growing. It's this, we got an earful of it. This is what he listens to every day. That's what, his direct reports hear all day. That's what they're all the way down. As BS. I think if you really wanted to solve it, if I were in charge of the BLS, I would put way more. I would look as to exactly what is this administrative survey that they're doing every quarter, and how do we tighten that up? How do we benchmark this thing every quarter? If we don't have all the returns in, fine. I'm willing to say I'm willing to take 90% of the administrative total population survey as opposed to, nothing.
Or like ideally, could you even offer, just like a cash incentive or just some sort of incentive?
No more money. Joe, stop it.
Well, no, you cut the workforce and you give the businesses instead a smaller amount of that cut workforce's salary.
Yeah, right. Or like force them to respond. I don't think you really even, I mean, again, that administrative stuff, when you're actually getting like a required final return from the entire population, I don't know how they're not leaning so hard into that. I'm clearly missing something.
I this is slightly off topic, but I saw a headline I think in the past week. So the BLS also publishes the CPI data. I think I saw something recently where they're saying they're hiring, they're paying people just everyday people, I think $25 an hour, just to go and look at prices and submit them.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and
they weren't doing that before.
We'll pay you a little bit for it.
Wait, you mean they weren't looking at prices before?
Yeah, well, this is not a CPI episode, but that was where my comment was coming from. Could you just offer the business an incentive to fill it out?
So then the other kind of takeaway I got was more of an appreciation of just how hard it is to even get these numbers. I mean, we're super greedy. We got to get these things every month. We got to put some number in front of them every month because the FOMC meeting every like 6 weeks. They got to track this stuff. It's not bad. I think considering they're getting like 60% of a response rate that is only a small fraction of the total population, and they're able to get within like a fraction of a percent to the top line number. I don't know. That seemed. I don't know how you can ask for too much more.
Fraction of a percent. I don't think that's right. I think it's based on those changes to the changes. Like you're not saying 100,000 or 200,000 relative to 150 million. You're saying 150,000 relative to now only 10,000. And so that's like a huge difference. Like they're way off.
Yeah,
relative to the employment base.
It's pretty good. I think we have to agree to disagree on this one. I think we need a little more conflict too in this podcast. You're wrong, Joe. How many times do I got to say it, Joe?
I was already wrong once at the start here. I can't have any more of it.
I'd like to agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. Yeah. Last thing I'll say, the idea about people fudging these numbers and then make it like politicized. I mean, to me personally, I think it seems like a stretch. I think this is really hard. They're doing the best that they can. I think there are a bunch of data nerds that probably work at the BLS, statisticians and stuff. And they just, I've worked with those people before. I really like them. They're accountants, statisticians. They're all about getting to like the truth. They just want to know what the right number is. And like the political appointees that are, given to them, I don't think they're going to push back a whole lot in terms of like, no, you're going to have to revise that down or something. I just don't think it works that way. So that's kind of where I sit with that. I don't think it's a political thing.
With all statistical models, especially ones about the economy, and we touched on this earlier, it's almost, you make so many assumptions. There are a lot of opportunities for even small political biases to creep into what your methodology is. So I don't think it's someone at the top saying, nah, we got to push that number way down by at least 50,000. It could be hundreds or thousands of employees that all want to slightly push it in one direction. So they make an assumption, the model that sounds benign, but could support their whatever bias that they do have. And once you have, in contrast to one person at the top making one huge change, you've got 1,000 employees all making very slight changes.
I don't know. I mean, we can game that out. If we wanted to be one of those employees, we want to try to sabotage the numbers. If that were the case, I wouldn't try to sabotage the first ones. I wouldn't like, it sounds like, if that's true, it sounds like they're going after the revision downward numbers when really they should be going after the first one on. You know what I mean? You'd want to kind of be sneakily revising them up after they hit the headlines. You know what I mean?
So my point though is that it's not even it doesn't even have to be intentional. Like within that birth-death model, for example, I'm sure there's a lot of parameters that go into it and a lot of assumptions. You could just tweak one of them very slightly. Say, Biden's in charge. I think the economy is going really well. I think there's extra jobs being born or extra companies being born this month, for example. It could be just a very slight tweak, and it doesn't even have to be intentional. But if everyone's thinking in that direction, it's a lot easier to nudge things around.
True. And I guess we're getting to the heart of what the word bias even means. It's not conscious. You're doing it subconsciously, which is to say not intentionally. I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical. I think they're just a bunch of data nerds trying to get to the right number. But
it's
by
like,
the way, they do make a strong point in saying that the net birth death model, it's a net benefit. Like without it, the revisions would be much higher. Be much like larger on an absolute basis. So it is a good thing. There's a reason why it's there. But it does have some limitations.
The more layers of the onion that we peel back here, the more reasonable, like the more sympathetic I am to just how difficult this issue is, which makes me, again, even more confident that it's not just some nefarious actor trying to manipulate things. This is a real issue. Maybe there's unconscious bias, maybe there isn't. But primarily, this is like Powell said, it's a huge number to estimate. It's a hugely uncertain number, especially when the economy is going through some period of change. And we haven't had a period like that as sharp as COVID, I think ever, or at least as long as this economic data has been publicized over, past half century or so.
That's all I had for you today. Hopefully you learned something. And everyone at home, likewise. This has been the Root of All Evil podcast. I'm Luke.
I'm Joe.
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.
See you then.
Bye.